Other people know what to do. And if you knew the patient was on his way to hospital, would you just shrug your shoulders and think, well, anyway, he'll soon be in hospital now, they'll fix him up? Suppose again that this building wasn't a hospital, but a school, and you were a teacher responsible for the boys under your charge. There was an accident. They happen anywhere, you know. Would you know what to do? Or in the street, the victim might be yourself, no one else about. Do you know the correct treatment for a simple thing like a nosebleed? Hold the nostril firmly, the head slightly forward, taking deep breaths through the mouth. Or you're going home from work and you suddenly see a child lying still on the pavement before you. Naturally, you're full of concern. You want to help, but can you? That child might be your child in your own home. Is that broken flex going to cost you his life? Your reaction would be the same as this. What would your action be? Are you, in other words, spot on with first aid? We're all familiar with the outside of the first aid box. Now let's look inside.
This is a first aid box produced by St Andrew's Ambulance Association. It contains all the materials necessary for rendering first aid to any type of injury in an accident. It has in it 3 sizes of prepared sterilized wound dressings: small, medium, and large. It has sterilized eye pads, sulfacetamide eye ointment, packet of various sizes of elastic adhesive dressings, sterilized cotton wool, safety pins, adhesive plaster, a rubber constrictive bandage for controlling severe bleeding, triangular bandages for forming slings or immobilizing fractured limbs.
As well as knowing what the contents are, we should know how to use them. The prepared wound dressing consists of a sterilized piece of gauze or lint, the back of which is attached to a bandage. Care should be taken not to get the dressing dirty. Don't finger it, and don't let the ends of the bandage fall on the floor or get soiled. Hold it with the head of the bandage in the palm of your hand, thumbs behind the dressing. Apply the dressing to the wound just as it is. Apart from removing any obvious loose foreign bodies, leave cleaning of the wound to the hospital or doctor. Leave the short end of the bandage free and make use of any joints, such as the thumb, to prevent the bandage from slipping. The ends are then tied with a reef knot. Next, the injured hand should be placed in a sling to rest it as much as possible. Place a triangular bandage over the front of the body as shown. Bring the end round the neck to the injured side and the point beyond the elbow. Move the injured arm onto the bandage with the forearm level. Tie a reef knot in front of the shoulder of the injured side. Bring the point over the elbow and pin. Fold the edges if they're too large, leaving the fingertips exposed. Now back to school to see how the teacher makes out with that young victim of a sawing accident. just an ordinary morning, and the boys are enjoying the more informal atmosphere in the woodwork room. It feels more grown up, and you can always have a chat with the fellow next to you. But if you don't pay attention to the job in hand and you're careless, well, it's happened, and he's got a nasty cut. His teacher loses no time in putting his first aid training into practice. He gets the first aid box and takes out a prepared wound dressing. He places the dressing on the injured part of the hand, bandages it, and as we've seen in our demonstration, ties it with a reef knot. This boy is receiving immediate, if temporary, care for his injury, and he'll suffer no further harm from it until he can see his doctor. That, in its simplest terms, is the real function of first aid. The injured hand is now made comfortable in a sling. Whatever you are, the ability to cope with a situation like this is valuable out of all proportion to the small amount of time and effort required to master elementary first aid. Another teacher who must be prepared for any emergency is the science teacher. Under his eye, the boys do simple experiments, and just as at home, something may be accidentally upset. Somebody may be careless just for a moment, and ouch, somebody is badly scalded. In this case, the shock produced by the scald is so great that the lad falls in a faint. His teacher steps in at once. He raises the boy's legs, using a stool for support. He loosens the patient's collar and, taking off his own coat, uses it to protect the boy from drafts. The scald is then dressed using a dry, sterile dressing. Dry burns are treated similarly. For burns caused by a corrosive chemical, the treatment is rather different. The injury is immediately flooded with water. Then, if the corrosive is an acid, the injured part must be bathed with an alkaline solution. If it is an alkali, then use a weak acid solution as a neutralizing agent. In all cases, bandaging is then completed in the normal way. It should be clear that gentle handling and regard for the patient's general comfort bring a quick response to treatment. Soon this chap will be out and around again and up to something else, no doubt. For boys will be boys in school or out of it, and trees and railings were surely made for climbing. Danger is the spice of life to a youngster, and accidents at play are a commonplace. Falls often result in sprained or broken limbs. This boy appears to be seriously injured. Fortunately, first aid is on the spot, and two passers-by are able to deal competently and quickly with the accident. The first thing is to find out what's wrong, either by questioning the patient or by looking for telltale signs. They make the boy as comfortable as possible, with a coat and other clothing. A leg injury is indicated, and suspecting a fracture, they play for safety and treat it as such. One steadies and supports the injured leg, while the other improvises bandages from ties and scarves. A newspaper or a pullover, for example, may be used as padding. A newspaper also comes in handy to push the bandages under the patient without moving his legs. To immobilize the fracture, the patient's sound limb or body may be used as a natural splint. Padding should be placed between the ankles and knees if these are to be tied together, and the area of the fracture should be kept clear of bandages. The bandaging should be firm, but not so tight as to impede circulation. The fracture dealt with, no time should be lost in telephoning for an ambulance. Meanwhile, the patient should be kept warm in case of shock. Shock may occur in an entirely different aspect, such as in electrical accidents or suffocation, as in drowning accidents. With these, the answer is mouth-to-mouth breathing. No time should be lost in trying to inflate the patient's lungs. If the lungs do not inflate, then try to remove any obstruction which may be present. Note that the head is tilted fully backwards and the nostrils pinched with one hand. With the other hand, hold the jaw forward. This is what happens in detail.
This is a section through the head and neck of the unconscious casualty lying on her back. In this position, the tongue has fallen back, blocking the air passages. Now, the normal route for air entering the lungs is through the nose and this air passage. If we tilt the head back, the tongue is drawn forward, allowing a passage for air. If we now hold the jaw forward, the tongue is drawn totally clear of the air passage. If we block the nose now and blow through the mouth, air can enter the lungs through the mouth and the windpipe.
Many more lives could be saved if this method were widely known and practiced. Yes, this boy is quite safe after all, because his father knows what to do. And because he knows what to do, he acts swiftly and without panic. When someone is knocked for six by an electric shock, there isn't time to reach for the first aid handbook. Every second counts, and sometimes a little knowledge adds up to, well, quite a lot. Because his teacher knew what to do, embryo carpenter can walk out of the schoolroom into his own home instead of into hospital. If he'd had to go to hospital like this little girl, the first aid he received would have speeded up his treatment and enabled him to remain an outpatient instead of occupying a hospital bed. We've all envied nurses and doctors at some time or other. It must be marvelous, we think, to be able to relieve suffering, to save a life even. A knowledge of first aid might help us to do just that. For some, the theatre spotlight shines relentlessly on the operating table. Yet even when surgical treatment is unavoidable, first aid helps to make the patient more comfortable until he is under expert care. A stitch, as it were, on the spot may save 9 on the operating table. In the theatre itself, preparations are meticulous and complete. Instruments and apparatus are sterilized, checked, and checked again. The staff are prepared to give every patient the utmost aid. Are you prepared to help them by giving first aid?